The scent of lavender still clung to the guest room. It was her favorite, a calming fragrance she'd always used. Now, it was a mocking reminder. She'd called him a gentleman. That's what she told me. That's what she whispered into her phone, thinking I was asleep. A gentleman. It had started subtly, of course. A new phone, always face down on the counter. Late nights at the office, which seemed odd for a part-time marketing gig. Then, the change in her. The spark in her eyes wasn't for me anymore. It was reserved for stolen moments and furtive glances at her glowing screen. I felt it. A cold knot in my gut that tightened with each passing day. Like a cancer, festering and growing. I'm not a fool. I'm a construction foreman. I see the bones of things. The structure beneath the surface. I know how to assess a load-bearing wall and a weak foundation. Our marriage was crumbling, and I knew, with an awful certainty, what was causing the cracks. I started small, pretending not to notice, my mind frantically piecing together the fractured fragments of our lives. I started listening, paying attention to the things she wasn't saying. I downloaded a call recorder app to my phone, feeling like a spy in my own home, a violation I couldn't ignore. It wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about understanding how we got here, how I'd become the other man in my own marriage. The calls were brutal, like a knife twisting in my chest. His voice, smooth and self-assured, the kind that made you think he had everything figured out. She'd giggle, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. It was the gentleman she'd been seeing, a man whose name she never mentioned, always carefully dancing around it, in her messages, using the code words meeting and work thing. Then came the day that forever changed everything. She started to complain about an itch, something she told me was a minor irritation. I chalked it up to some new cream or soap she was using. But a few weeks later, I found her crying in the bathroom. She'd gone to the doctor and was back home, devastated. It wasn't an irritation. It was herpes simplex virus type 2. Incurable. The doctor confirmed it. I was there, holding her hand as we both listened in stunned silence, a silent scream echoing in my mind. She'd always been meticulous about her health. It was my fault she had this. My fault she'd been so trusting to find her affection and intimacy somewhere else. I felt betrayed, and I was angry. But a part of me hurt deeply for her, this beautiful, amazing woman who chose to love someone else. She was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that wrenched at my heart. The doctor had made it very clear. The infection was severe, had already caused permanent scarring, and could lead to further medical complications. She would never be the same now. The gentleman, the man she'd praised, the one who'd left her with a lifelong burden, was nothing more than a careless disease vector. This whole time he'd been lying to her, while she was lying to me. I saw the reality of their love, a disgusting act of deceit and callousness that had cost her so much. That's when the anger solidified into something cold and focused. My rage didn't manifest in shouting or breaking things, did it? It became a carefully calculated plan, a precision tool aimed at dismantling the life of the gentleman. Her first few weeks were a fog. I was strangely calm, supportive, playing the role of the sympathetic husband. I took her to her appointments, held her hand, listened to her, while all the while a part of me was dead inside. She broke down repeatedly, a mixture of grief, guilt, and shame. She couldn't look me in the eyes. I wouldn't let her. I decided not to confront her, not yet. My priority was now him. My revenge was more complicated than a fistfight, or even divorce. I was going to destroy him, systematically and thoroughly. I started by digging. I wasn't some hacker genius. I was a man who knew how to get things done. I hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman who specialized in corporate espionage and personal affairs. It was expensive, but I didn't care. I was already starting to build up my plan. It was so clear in my mind, like the blueprints of one of my construction sites. She dug deep. She found his name, his real name, not the carefully crafted pseudonym he'd given her. He was a lawyer, a partner at a prestigious firm in the city. Mr. Gentleman had a wife and 2 kids. I saw him on social media, a picture-perfect family, a house in the suburbs. The anger flared up, a burning white heat behind my eyes. He played the virtuous husband and the perfect family man, all while living a double life, spreading disease and pain without a second thought. My plan began to take shape. I used the information the investigator had given me and started planting information, making it appear as though he was embezzling money. I leaked some fake financial documents, using anonymizing technology to send them to the State Bar Association and the IRS. I didn't need to fabricate much. The man was already living on the edge. It was simple, just push him off the cliff. The wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind, and soon they were grinding him down. His firm started an investigation, then his bank accounts were frozen due to the allegations of misappropriated funds. It spread quickly. Word got around to his wife, who now suspected that he had another life outside the family. I watched it all unfold, a grim satisfaction settling in my bones. He was losing everything: his career, his reputation, and, soon enough, his family. I knew how a building was supposed to be put up. I knew what kind of support it needed. I also knew how to tear one down piece by piece. I never confronted him. He never knew it was me. It was far more satisfying watching his world crumble without me being present, knowing I had orchestrated his destruction. He never knew the man behind the machine. It was silent and invisible. I wanted the man to be left questioning everything that had happened. I wanted him to feel as lost as I had been, as hopeless as my wife had felt, as afraid as she was. I wanted him to feel everything he had done, without ever truly knowing that it had come from me. One evening, a few months later, my wife came downstairs. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen her wear in a long time. She had her makeup on and had done her hair. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen since her diagnosis. A flicker of hope. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice still raw with pain and emotion, but now containing a new sound. The sound of sorrow. I looked at her, at the scarring on her face, and in that moment, I realized my revenge had done nothing to truly heal the wound in my own heart. It had been a temporary distraction, a detour in the long road of our marriage. I'd torn down his world, but I still had to build up ours. It was far more difficult than I had anticipated. "I know," I replied, my voice finally carrying a touch of warmth. "We have a lot to talk about. I know what she did to me was wrong. What they did to each other was even more wrong." She was still living in our house, and I'd begun to think that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. There would be no erasing what happened, but maybe we could find a different kind of love, one forged in fire, tempered by pain, and finally, rebuilt, brick by brick, with truth and honesty, the way I'd always tried to. The lavender scent in the guest room was still there, but now, it seemed less mocking, more like a reminder. Not of what we had lost, but of what we still might rebuild. I still thought of him. I saw him in the newspapers sometimes. An article detailing his fall from grace, followed by rumors of the scandal that ended his career. I didn't feel triumph anymore, just a profound sadness. It was like watching a fire engulf an old building that once held beauty, now just ashes and dust. The revenge hadn't brought me the peace I'd craved. Instead, it made me realize that true healing wasn't about tearing others down. It was about building yourself, and sometimes, someone else, back up. And maybe, just maybe, that was a much more satisfying outcome than I could ever have imagined. Our marriage is different now. Scarred, like her, but stronger, in ways I never thought possible.